Welcome back to the PFF NFL show, a very special show for you on this Wednesday, February 7th. We're going to be breaking down a little bit of the PFF 101 for you guys. We've been releasing it throughout the week. We'll give you a sneak peek at the top 10, how we formed it. But first, there's some big NFL news we want to get into, some things we missed. The first thing, Josh McDaniels was the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts for not technically any period of time, but it was all over their Twitter for a good portion of yesterday, and decided at the very last minute that he is not. His assistant coaches, or supposed assistant coaches, were the last to know. We're already in negotiations with the Colts, and Chris Ballard said they have jobs if they want them. Just really a terrible situation that he left that organization, those coaches in. What do you make of this, Steve?
So everybody's trying to figure out what would have happened here. Is it because he saw Andrew Luck's shoulder or an MRI of his shoulder? I think it's just the Patriots made a last-minute push to keep McDaniels around, and I don't know if there's something going on behind the scenes like, hey, guys, Belichick's he's got one more year, then you're up, Josh, or you guys got 2 more years and you're up. But I do think there's something way more on the New England side than on the Indianapolis side, and I also know that the Crafts more than happy to stick it to the Colts after the whole Deflategate thing. So a little bit of bad blood there, and McDaniels some level of familiarity in New England, and maybe being the next guy up as the head coach.
That's what it's got to be, right? The only way this makes any sense to turn your back on a franchise when it's basically been signed, sealed, and delivered, because at that point you're effectively torpedoing your chances of being a head coach anywhere else. It has to be that you've got some kind of promise that you are the heir apparent, the guy in waiting next to, after Bill Belichick calls it a day, you're going to get the gig turned over to you. Because the fallout from this for McDaniels around the league is significant. His agent has already, I don't know if you can fire your client, but his agent has walked away, severed ties. He was also the agent of Chris Ballard, the GM for the Indianapolis Colts. So that was already a pretty tricky situation. The rest of the league must be looking at that. The Colts are on the hook for 3, I think, assistant coaches that they hired to be Josh McDaniels' assistant coaches.
Now that's a weird situation.
And have said that they're going to do right by those guys, and there's a job there if they want them, which is maybe the most crazy part about this. Is there's 3 guys potentially sitting there with no head coach, who they're going to have to find a head coach who's going to want to come into this situation and pick up 3 guys that are potentially on the coaching staff if they choose to accept those jobs. The whole thing is a pretty weird situation.
The thing to me, though, is I just can't see him actually being the coach in waiting for Belichick, because Belichick's only 65. Like, that's still young in terms of coaching age, especially for someone like Belichick, who he's going to be there till he's going to be coaching till he's 80. Like, he's not just going to give up. He's not a guy who can just retire and go live. Did you not
read the article, Mike? There's tension.
I know there's tension in the building.
It's a big rift.
But Belichick, he's not going to. I guess maybe he's not going to retire is what I'm saying. He might quit, go somewhere else, but he's not just going to give up coaching at 65. If he has 20 more years on his life, he's going to go nuts over those 20 years if he's not coaching a football team. So I'm saying. So I don't think the coach and waiting thing, I'm not sure it makes sense. So I think McDaniels has sort of backed himself into this corner where he's the OC in New England for the next 10 years at this point.
Well, the other thing is, do you really want to be the coach in waiting after Bill Belichick? Because presumably Bill Belichick is going to go more or less at the same time as Tom Brady goes, at which point you're now the coach of a franchise that doesn't have the 2 reasons they were successful, and you're the guy following greatness. You never want to be the guy that follows the great, Hall of Fame, whatever.
Yeah, you need a patsy in that role.
Yeah,
1 or 2 years of just crap.
Exactly.
And then you switch
need
to the
one
next
guy to follow it, stink it up, fail to live up to the expectations, and then you sweep in and pick up the pieces. I wouldn't want to follow Bill Belichick.
Maybe he just wants to be an offensive coordinator
for the rest of his life.
For Tom, he misses Tom. He'll miss Tom.
That is the thing. Being a coordinator of anything in New England, you're not going to get fired anytime soon, especially with Tom Brady at quarterback. Yeah, right. You're not going to get fired unless Tom Brady, says that he wants you to get fired. But you just kiss up to Tom Brady enough, and all of a sudden you're there. Like I said, next 10 years, you have job security there.
It is pretty much a no-lose situation, the job that he's currently in. I mean, other than the fact that you just burned bridges with a bunch of teams in the NFL, your stock essentially can only go up because you're going to look good as long as Brady and Belichick are there.
I would love, though, if it came out where it's like, I saw, he's asked for an MRI, he showed up to the building, asked for an MRI, saw it, and it's like, no, like of Andrew Luck's shoulder.
First thing he did was open the filing cabinet and look through Andrew Luck's medical records and just went, no,
I'm out. Read the MRI directly? Like, he knew exactly what he was looking at? Yeah. Like, no, this looks like a bad shoulder.
He went on WebMD for last week. He's like, how to read a shoulder MRI. Read that one and it's like, get me out.
We've been way too serious about this stuff. That is exactly what happened. And he's like, I've already coached Brissett. No, we've been there. We got shut out last time I had him.
Came in, pulled the X-ray up to the ceiling light, and just dropped it and walked out of the building.
Because it legitimately goes from one of the best jobs in the NFL that was open this offseason to one of the worst on the backs of whatever's going on with Andrew Luck's shoulder.
This also teed up the captain Andrew Luck Twitter gif, the Twitter meme, the colonial
mother.
Colonial War Andrew Luck. We have been deceived. Dearest mother, we have been deceived.
I love it.
Well, that is the Josh McDaniels situation. The big news going on in the NFL right now. Also, we didn't really touch on the Alex Smith trade from a week ago. Large ramifications there for the Chiefs, the Redskins, and the free agent quarterback market at large, as it looks like, 100% chance now that Kirk Cousins does become a free agent at some point this offseason. What do you make of the Redskins, Steve, giving up a third-rounder and their best cornerback, the highest-graded cornerback, from a season ago, Kyle Fuller?
Mike dropping hot takes.
Josh Norman almost just tweeted at us again.
Josh Norman did have that somewhat cryptic tweet.
And Kendall Fuller.
I think he was calling us out in that thing.
Yeah.
So they'll get the third-round pick back. So it's pretty much Kendall Fuller for Alex Smith, and a massive contract for Alex Smith. Not the team I was expecting Alex Smith to go to. I mean, we kept trying to peg Alex Smith to a team with a defense, the Jaguars, the Broncos, a team where they say, bring this guy in who's a step up from Blake Bortles, a big step up from what Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch did. You have to think with the Redskins, though, the history of what we've seen with Alex Smith. Smith was a better quarterback than Kirk Cousins last year, but the previous 2 years, Cousins, as good if not better than him. So to me, it's more of a lateral move for similar money that Cousins would have expected.
Yeah, there's a lot of different lenses you can look at this through from the Redskins' point of view. One is the fact that now they have a franchise quarterback still. Like, you have a franchise quarterback. There was a chance that they went and got no one this offseason, that they were going into 2018 with Colt McCoy as the starter, which would have been obviously a nuclear situation. You're rebuilding at that point. So from that lens, if they knew they couldn't re-sign Kirk Cousins, you have a franchise quarterback. You make a move like that to do it, to keep the sort of continuity on an offense that's fairly good. So from that perspective, it makes sense. But from the perspective of if they had a chance at any point of the last 3 years to sign Kirk Cousins to any sort of comparable deal to where they just gave Alex Smith, this is just a failure of management to have to give up a third-rounder and your most promising young starting cornerback to do so.
Yeah, there's a few things there. I think the first thing to take away from this is just how badly the Kirk Cousins situation has been managed from the get-go.
Yes.
Because it seems extremely hard to believe that at no point in the negotiations would Kirk Cousins have signed to a comparable deal to the one they just handed Alex Smith.
Yeah.
Now it looks like there was no chance he was going to take that deal. So the second takeaway from this, to me, is that Kirk Cousins' contract this offseason is going to be massive. It is going to break the bank. It is going to break records. It is going to reset the quarterback market in terms of the amount of dollars he's going to get. He is going to get paid this offseason in a way we haven't seen any other quarterback get paid. Like, this is the guy that's going to reset the market. That is going to be crazy. Because Kirk Cousins, even at his best, is not the guy that should be redefining quarterback dollars. But he's going to.
The whole market went
no, I know. Matt Stafford. It's like
it rarely is the guy that's the best.
It's whoever the next guy is that's up. Look, when you look big picture on these two guys, right? And our analytics guys have done a really good job. We've done a lot of QB studies, and you kind of we could throw these guys into clusters of, are they the top tier? Are they the next tier? These guys are both essentially what we'd consider like cluster 3, mid-tier type of quarterbacks, where if all things go right, and this was Alex Smith last year, if you have a Travis Kelce, if you have a Tyreek Hill, if you have a great scheme that's opening up plays, and you play maybe the best football you've played, it all adds up to these great passing numbers. That's what Alex Smith did last year. Kirk Cousins, the previous couple of years before 2017, it was similar. When you have Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson and Jordan Reed and a good scheme, it adds up to really good stats. These guys don't make the passing game. They're a product of their ecosystem. And those guys breaking the bank, that is the scary proposition, because then you have to surround them with this perfect supporting cast of playmakers and offensive line. And when you spend that much money on these guys, how do you make that happen?
And that last part I think is important, because I don't know that you can be sure what Alex Smith you're going to get, because all the way through the 2017 season, we were saying that this Alex Smith is a different Alex Smith than we've seen in the past. He was more aggressive. He was better going down the field when he was aggressive. And I don't know that anybody knows what the reason for that was. Did he just say, screw it, there's a guy in waiting about to take my job, so I'm just going to ball and see what happens. I'm going to put it all out in the field and roll with that. Or did we just see a streak of Alex Smith play where he was more aggressive? And in 2018, we're going to see him go back to this pathological conservative quarterback that we've seen in the past. You've just handed a monster contract to a guy that I don't know if you can be sure you're even getting the guy we saw last year. And if he goes back to the player we've seen in the past, that's a much bigger problem, because you've got a guy that you probably can win with, but it's going to be extremely hard, and you need everything around him to be perfect, because he's only going to take the short stuff. He's not a guy that puts the ball in the air deep down the field and takes those aggressive shots that will back a defense off. So I think this is a really risky move for the Redskins, and that's before you'd get into the idea that they traded away Kendall Fuller, who was their brightest young prospect at corner and looking like he was becoming one of the better young DBs in the league. So for Kansas City, it's a steal. They got a great young DB at a position of need, because they've been trying to fill the cornerback spots opposite Marcus Peters for a while, and they got trade collateral for a quarterback that they were presumably going to get rid of at some point anyway, with Patrick Mahomes in the wings.
Yeah, from the Chiefs' point of view, it makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely.
Like, that makes getting Kendall Fuller right now is better than getting a first-round pick, because ideally, if you got their first-round pick from Washington, ideally that turns into someone like Kendall Fuller. Like, you already know that this guy is proven in the league. So from that perspective, it's a steal for Kansas City. Like, that deal is fantastic for them. They did a great job of putting themselves in that situation by drafting Mahomes a season ago. But from Washington's perspective, the draft pick, the third-round pick, is sort of a wash. You lose Cousins anyway. But, yeah, they put themselves too far behind the eight ball in the Cousins discussions. That should never have they should never have gotten to this point. And I don't want to see what that defense is going to look like without Fuller next year on the back end. Like, they've struggled. They finally had somewhat competent secondary play this season after struggling for a handful of years. I think it might revert back to, they just seem like another 8-8 type of season for them.
Yeah, and after Kirk Cousins, the narrative that we kept pushing was that 2015 and 16, when he had the great statistical season, it was because of all those playmakers that I mentioned earlier, and that got cleaned up this past year. Those guys that were all gone, and it just wasn't the same deal. Kirk Cousins didn't play as well,
and McVay.
McVay was gone as well. Exactly. So I'll say this: if I'm spending that type of money on Alex Smith, I'm telling him you are going to play like the 2017 version of Alex Smith. You're going to have, because it wasn't just he was aggressive and careless with the football. He was more aggressive, made some great throws down the field, but still took care of the football. And Alex Smith has always been on a winning team. He's always been a winning quarterback. And I know we don't like to dive too much into quarterback wins, but I do think that there is a style that you can put your team in a position to win. And that's Alex Smith's style of taking care of the football, can put the team into position to win. This year he took that step forward with the downfield throwing. I think you need that level of aggression, though, from him if you're going to get the most out of this contract. You really can't just get uber game manager Alex Smith with this supporting cast in Washington as it is.
But that assumes that was a conscious thing, that he was deliberately being more aggressive. There was a schematic, a premeditated deal that he was going to be the most aggressive player he could become, and it just worked out this way. It may have just been a streak of, for whatever reason, Alex Smith is putting the ball in the air deep down the field more this year than he's done in the past, and he may not have control over the fact that it reverts back to the guy that he's been for the rest of his career. That would be the thing that scares me if I'm Washington.
You'd like to think that you could dictate that through your own play calling and coaching, so we'll see. And I don't even know what they want. They might want game manager Alex Smith, because every coach thinks that, give me this talented guy, and I'll make him the best, right? Everybody thinks that. Every coach thinks that. No, they don't think logically as far as here's what this guy's limitations are, here's where I need to stretch him a little bit, here's where I need to take advantage of his strengths.
I will say, though, there are a handful of teams this year that if they had Alex Smith at quarterback could have legitimately contended for championships in their respective conferences. Jaguars, Ravens, even maybe the Bills, some teams, if they had a quarterback like Alex Smith, if you pair him with a very good defense, you are a contender. I'm not sure Washington is necessarily pairing him with a very good defense, but that's on that staff now to address. So I do think that they could, given the situation they're in right now, they had to do something like that. So I don't hate the move from the Redskins' perspective. What does this mean, though, for Kirk Cousins? Who would you put as the front runners to sign him at the moment?
Man, everybody's talking about Minnesota.
No.
Being a team?
I think it's Minnesota.
No.
They have the most cap space, and you're not tied to any of those guys in Minnesota. It would be nice, but from a go back to the pick standpoint, someone signs Case Keenum for $18 million, someone signs Sam Bradford for $18 million. You're getting 2 third-rounders back. That's not insignificant return on investment to then sign Kirk Cousins. Although that negates itself through one pick with signing Cousins. But
here's the thing. I mean, I said before that this is a team, or Kirk Cousins' contract is going to completely reset the marketplace. You don't want to be in that situation unless you're getting that absolute star quarterback. Is Kirk Cousins a significant enough upgrade over any of the quarterbacks the Vikings currently have hitting free agency, all of whom are going to get significantly less money than Kirk Cousins would in the open market? So the Vikings are one of the few teams who have the cap space to aggressively go after Cousins and make that contract happen. But I don't think that they're one of the teams that's going to want to make it, that's going to want to do it, because they can sign Case Keenum for presumably a fraction of that contract. They could bring Teddy Bridgewater back for, again, presumably a fraction of that contract. And then you've got Sam Bradford as well. The team, to me, that makes the most sense is the Jets, because, again, that is a team. You're really limited to X number of teams that even have the cap space to make that move. That's why, I mean, the Broncos are the team that make the most logical sense from a fit, but they just don't have that kind of ammunition, because you're going to be talking about a contract that completely redoes your cap space situation. So the Jets, I think, are a team that does have the space to make it happen. They do have the need at quarterback. Obviously, Josh McDaniels was their starter last year. Neither of the guys behind him, though young, look like they have any capacity to step up and start. Kirk Cousins could come in, be the quarterback, immediately put them in a much better situation, and they've got the space to make it happen. The other teams with the space up at the top, you've got the 49ers, who are going to lock down Jimmy Garoppolo. You've got the Browns, who could be in the market, but you've got to assume they're going to target the draft more than they would free agency, but I wouldn't rule them out. The Colts have the space, but Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett, you've got to assume they're probably not in that market. The Bucs, Jameis Winston. The Texans, Deshaun Watson. The Titans, Marcus Mariota. So every team up there with the kind of space to make it happen either has a quarterback, or there's a few teams, I think, that are there.
You could find cap space.
Not that much cap space.
You can find cap space.
This is true.
You just cut. You could find cap space. Cap space is not an issue. I keep coming back to the Scott McLaughlin quote about Kirk Cousins has notebooks about on top of notebooks about all of these teams and their supporting cast and their offensive line, and he knows where he wants to go. And if he's evaluating all those teams, do you think he wants to go to the Jets? I don't even know if he wants to go to Denver. I think he's going to be like, give me Thielen and Diggs. Give me this offensive line, which crept back toward average, and they could promise, and they got some young guys that can develop and everything there. Minnesota and Dalvin Cook out of the back. I feel like Cousins is going to be pursuing the Vikings as fine. His best.
But he's also going to be pursuing $30 million a year, and they're not going to do that.
Well, we'll see.
I think they will. I think it's the Vikings. I do think the Vikings are the most likely landing point at this. There are some other teams, though, with, like you said, the Broncos, Bills, middling cap space could create some. Could make a play. Giants as well. All right, let's get on to the 101, though, what you guys have all been waiting for. We've been releasing it throughout the week. I'll give you guys a sneak peek of the top 10 here in a little bit. It hasn't been released yet. You guys are going to be the first to hear it. But, Sam, break it down for us how we went about deciding upon the 101, because the NFL and their top 100 is notoriously, one, terrible, and two, decided upon by players just listing like 20. Is that it? Like they list 20 names or something?
And some of them don't even turn in ballots.
Every player or coach turns in like a ballot of like 20 names. Sometimes they don't even have 20 names. Sometimes like 5, and it's all your teammates.
I heard like an offensive line coach will we'll do one ballot for his entire offensive line, or fill out the same ballot for all of them. It's just a mess.
Yeah, they vote en masse as a group
right
against their opposing position. But if you haven't faced that guy this year, you don't know how he's played.
No, of course not.
As much as we like to assume that coaches and players are the best possible position people to judge the quality of players throughout the NFL, they're really not. And if you look at those guys are busy trying to plan for the upcoming opponent. They're not sitting there watching every game tape available to try and work out how some defensive tackle on a team they're not facing this year is going to play. So, the reality is those guys really don't have a great handle on how the league as a whole are performing on an individual level.
Even beyond that, I've also sat down next to coaches where they watch the same play as us, and I completely disagree with their own assessment, not necessarily of their own players, about what actually happened on the play. And they're more biased than we could ever be, because half the time they're like, well, that's not a bad play because I can't expect that guy to do. He's just not good. He can't make that block. And we look at it through the lens of, did you make the block or did you not?
There is a lot of that, actually, that coaches adjust what they expect according to how athletically useless their guy is.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is a negative in our eyes, the fact that this guy athletically is terrible.
Right.
It shouldn't be used as a way to mitigate the bad things that he's doing.
It's not his fault. He's not fast. Well,
that's why he's grading badly, not a reason to excuse that. So anyway, our list is the only list you're going to find that comes from the play-by-play, the exhaustive play-by-play grading of every player in the league. We include the postseason for the 101. We don't include the postseason for our PFF awards, which is why sometimes you'll see a couple of orders, rankings have flipped in the last few weeks because of outstanding playoff performances or terrible playoff performances by some players. And what happens is every PFF analyst, every analyst that does live NFL games puts in a ballot. They put in their 101. Those all get combined together in a giant list. We toss out the top and the bottom rankings for every player as a sort of standard. You lop off the questionable score from the East German judge in the Olympics, and that's how we get our starting point. Then we go through and we try and adjust these rankings for any missing context that we may have. So does a guy have a really tough role within his defense schematically? Do we need to bump him up the list a little bit for that? We have this giant exhaustive meeting where we debate all these things, and then the 101 is set.
Big one, too. Positional value, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the huge difference, too. If we were doing this based off positional value, it would be 20 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And then everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the fact that we are treating all positions fairly equal.
Exactly. This is a list where all positions are treated equal. So just because you're a guard doesn't mean you have no chance of featuring on this 101. If you dominate at your position of guard, you are going to have a high position in the rankings.
And most of the comments we get are you telling me there's 58 guys more valuable than Drew Brees? And we're like, nope, that's not what we're telling you at all.
Yeah, not at all.
Read the intro.
Just that 58 guys had comparatively better seasons performance-wise than this quarterback.
A lot of big surprises there. We had a grand total of 6 rookies on the list, which I think is indicative of this rookie class. I think it was one of the better rookie classes in recent memory. Had 4 of those rookies in the top 35. There's going to be some stars in this rookie class.
Yeah, it was a strong rookie class. We've also got some sort of team and player tally things over the 101 history. So we've been running this since 2010, and the Seattle Seahawks have the most appearances on this list of 44 guys since 2010. New England Patriots second at 39. The worst team in the NFL has just 10 total appearances since 2010. The San Francisco 49ers in 2012, the season they got to the Super Bowl, they had more appearances in that one year than this team, which is the Washington Redskins, who just made the big deal for Kirk Cousins. So,
Alex Smith.
That 2012 Niners team. That was legit.
That was a stacked team. What was the one guy on this list, Steve and Sam? Steve, you go first, that you thought you would fight for more so, that you wanted higher than we had him initially? What was one guy that you're like, I think this guy is better than where he ended up ranked with that initial analyst list?
Well, Tom Brady should be number 1 no matter what. Mm-hmm. No, so I think Jalen Ramsey was a tough one at 13. Mm-hmm. Grade ended up just a little bit below some of the other linebackers and edge defenders, but I think maybe the value that he brought was a little bit more than even the grade showed. So I thought he was great. And I think Gronk, too. We don't So Gronk always ends up like 8 to 10 or 11 or 12, and you could truly put him in the top 3 any given year with the value he brings at tight end, especially compared to all other tight ends in the NFL.
Yeah, I see it. Sam?
I really love Reuben Foster. I'm big on guys that get kind of screwed because of playing time. I honestly think that if you dominate during your time on the field, as long as you're not at a completely ridiculous level of playing time, like 200 snaps, you were barely on the field. If you've got a reasonable amount of playing time over the course of the season, I think the greatness that you displayed during those snaps should be what catapults you up the list, rather than kind of hold you back just because you didn't have the same level of playing time as other guys. So Reuben Foster, I think, was an absolute star for that 49ers defense. Transformed it in the way that a few players did this offseason when they came to new teams. Marshawn Lattimore in New Orleans, Calais Campbell in Jacksonville. I think Foster had the same kind of effect for the 49ers defense when he got on the field, just didn't play enough to get him higher up on the list than wherever he was, 59.
Yeah, I like Foster. He was a stud as a rookie. My guy, though, who I would say is Tyreek Hill. I think he ended up almost in the 80s after all the analysts voted. He ended up on our list at 72. I was pushing for him maybe even higher. To me, he was arguably, after guys like Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, the most valuable receiver in the NFL, just from what he brings to the table and what opposing defenses have to do to account for him this season, was so impactful. Just that deep threat being on the field every single play. Maybe the most elite deep threat we've seen in our time grading at PFF. It's certainly reminiscent since Deshaun Jackson was in his prime at least. So he was just like the reason that Chiefs offense played at the highest level I think it has in the Alex Smith era was almost solely because of him and his breakout season this year.
I think that's fair. And we mentioned a few times this year with Hill, I mean, it was a special – it was just if there was single coverage, they were giving him the ball deep. They were giving him that deep opportunity. And a lot of times with the grading and with just stats in general, it becomes a high volume type of deal. But that ability to legitimately score a 60-yard touchdown on any given play, extremely valuable, and that was certainly Hill.
It is extremely valuable. The only kind of note of caution I have with that is that you don't actually need to be any good to have that threat, in that Torrey Smith provides the same threat, albeit differently, for that Eagles offense, and Torrey Smith is almost entirely useless. He is there for decoy purposes of being able to scare a defense deep.
It's not just a threat, though. He's going to get open deep, and if you have a quarterback that can throw him the ball,
that's what I'm saying.
Doesn't get open deep every single time.
Not every single time, but he's open deep a lot because he's got speed, and it's enough to scare a defense into doing the kind of things that you need to do.
Well, that's valuable if you have a quarterback that's not flackling.
It is valuable. And that's all I'm saying.
It's the amount of scared, though. There's different levels of
there
scared.
And I'm not trying to say that Torrey Smith is even in the same breath as Tyreek Hill in terms of quality, in terms of how dangerous he is. I'm just saying that there are limits to how valuable that threat is, because it is achievable by dramatically worse players than Tyreek Hill. Not the same level of threat, but a threat like that.
I still think you're just like, that point's just so off. Like, I don't think that's like, it's like the level of.
So you're telling me Randy Moss and Torrey Smith
you're not
are the same
changing
guy.
your
That's
coverages.
exactly what I'm saying,
Thank you.
You're not changing your coverages based on Torrey Smith might line up against my slower cornerback. Like, you're not that scared of that. You're changing your coverages based on if Tyreek Hill lines up against a guy who's running a 4.6, you're changing your coverages because it's just not going to end well. You're not playing man free in that situation because he's got to toast.
He torched our top cornerback, our top 10 cornerback, Casey Hayward, for
who was injured,
deep touchdown. He was a little banged up.
Yeah,
it was an ugly rep though.
It was,
thanks to Tyreek's speed.
Well, that is the PFF 101, and that is it for us today. We will be back on Friday giving you guys a little bit our next draft episode 3 of the draft. We'll talk to you then.